When temperatures drop below -30°C, war doesn't take a break, it toughens up. Metal gets brittle, fuel thickens, and batteries die. Human bodies start to fail long before machines do. On the Eastern Front, as winter tightens its grip, the Russian army is realizing that the one ally it's counted on for ages is now turning against them. General Winter isn't on Moscow's side anymore. This time, it's out for blood. Winter is a tough opponent, right? It doesn't care about flags or propaganda. It hits everyone equally hard. Out on the Ukrainian front, it's not just Ukraine feeling the chill. Russia's logistics and manpower are really taking a hit. Reports from the front lines show a scene that doesn't match the image of a modern military at all. It's all about who's ready and who's not, and Winter is definitely punishing the unprepared. Russian soldiers are facing more than just enemy fire. They're battling hunger, harsh weather, and broken equipment. Supply lines that used to rely on trucks are now getting a boost from animals. In a wild story from the front, a Russian unit commander shared that they bought a donkey out of sheer desperation because nothing else was working. Now, that little guy is hauling supplies over a stretch of nearly 20 kilometers. Talk about resourcefulness. Improvisation in a romantic sense. It's all about managing chaos. The effects are felt right away. Soldiers who don't get enough food can't keep their bodies warm. Without dry shelters or proper winter gear, they lose heat way too fast. And when they're sleep deprived, their thinking gets fuzzy just when they need to be sharp. In these tough times, morale doesn't just dip slowly, it crashes hard. Snaps. Psychological breakdown precedes physical collapse. And then once that line is crossed, units cease to function as military formations. They become groups of individuals trying to survive another night. Intelligence assessments now indicate that frostbite and cold-related injuries are incapacitating more Russian soldiers than Ukrainian weapons in some sectors. In the 21st century, the idea that a nuclear-armed state is losing combat power primarily to exposure and starvation is not merely embarrassing. This situation is pretty wild. Russia is facing a military failure that usually happens to poorly equipped insurgents, not a major army claiming to stand with NATO. It's ironic, right? The same winter that once stopped the Nazis in World War II is now hitting the Russian army hard. The quiet across the frozen front lines isn't calm, it's chaos. And when night falls, it's the most dangerous time of day. Not because of. As temperatures drop to unbearable levels, survival takes priority over orders. In these harsh conditions, discipline fades, and the need for warmth and food becomes everything. Military experts are already calling the current Russian winter logistics failure a prime example of what can go wrong when a force is unprepared. It's not about resilience. It's a lesson in the consequences of neglecting the basics. Mobilization is divorced from sustainment capacity. Numbers without logistics are not power. They are a liability. And Russia has amassed approximately 710,000 troops tied to the Ukrainian theater. A force so large that feeding, clothing, heating, and supplying it has become mathematically unmanageable. Winter, of course, is brutal for both sides. Ukraine is also under strain. Russia has intensified its campaign against Ukrainian energy infrastructure, striking power generation and transmission facilities almost daily, particularly around Kyiv. Snowstorms and blizzards complicate repairs and strain civilian resilience. But Ukraine has already endured multiple wartime winters. Its systems, though damaged, are adapted to operate under pressure. The Russian system, by contrast, is failing in ways its own propaganda never accounted for. For years, the Kremlin has repeated a simple narrative. Russia cannot be defeated because winter always intervenes. But as 2026 approaches, that narrative has collapsed. Winter has not frozen Ukrainian resistance. It has frozen Russian momentum. Tanks stall not because they are under fire, but because fuel deliveries are disrupted and engines refuse to start. And even if those tanks could move, the Kremlin increasingly lacks the financial capacity to keep them operational. Russia's treasury is bleeding. The war has opened a fiscal crater estimated at $50 billion and growing. This is not a theoretical number. It represents real trade-offs. Every ruble spent sustaining an overstretched army is a ruble not spent stabilizing the domestic economy. And yet, despite this reality, the Kremlin continues to repeat one of history's most infamous mistakes: massing enormous forces deep into hostile territory without the economic depth to sustain them. Napoleon tried this. The result is taught in every military history course. Russia is now reenacting it with modern weapons and worse demographics. The war has evolved beyond a conflict between states. It has become an exhaustion strategy imposed by the Kremlin not only on Ukraine but on its own population. And recent reports suggest that this strategy has crossed into territory that even seasoned observers find difficult to process. To compensate for mounting losses, Russia is allegedly conscripting the elderly, the seriously ill, and individuals with mental disabilities. These are not isolated claims. Multiple international outlets report that mentally disabled individuals have been pulled from prisons and young people with lifelong cognitive impairments have been declared fit for service. Medical exemptions that once removed individuals from conscription are now treated as minor inconveniences. The standard is no longer fitness or training. It is respiration. If a person is breathing, they are potentially deployable. This approach raises a question that cuts to the core of state legitimacy. What kind of leadership values filling gaps in an army more than preserving its society? On the battlefield, the consequences are predictable. Crews freeze inside vehicles whose optical systems ice over and become useless. Fuel tankers and ammunition trucks operating behind the lines are hunted by Ukrainian FPV drone teams with extreme precision. When logistics vehicles are destroyed, entire armored formations are immobilized without a shot being fired. A tank without fuel is not a weapon. It is frozen scrap metal worth millions and contributing nothing. In the Kiev region, reports confirm that at least one Russian unit surrendered intact. Not because it ran out of ammunition, but because its vehicles froze and its personnel were suffering advanced hypothermia. Soldiers equipped with outdated Soviet-era winter gear huddle in trenches trying to conserve heat. Against Ukrainian thermal imaging drones, these attempts are futile. In snow-covered terrain, a group of cold soldiers stands out as clearly as a flare. This is the point where doctrine fails. Russia's long-standing emphasis on quantity over quality collides with modern surveillance and the unforgiving physics of extreme cold. 710,000 soldiers do not multiply combat power if the state cannot sustain them. They multiply demand. Every additional soldier requires food, fuel, clothing, shelter, medical care, and transport. The moral dimension cannot be ignored. A leadership willing to sacrifice its most vulnerable citizens is not acting from strategic necessity alone. It is acting out of desperation. And while the outcome of the war itself remains uncertain, one group is already losing beyond recovery. The Russian population, whose economic security and human dignity are being consumed to prolong a failing campaign. The evidence is increasingly visual. Footage from the front shows captured soldiers who are neither elite nor ideological. One such man, a soldier from the 1,428th Motorized Rifle Regiment captured by Ukraine's 15th Operational Task Brigade in the Kharkiv region, represents something larger. He is not a volunteer. He is not a fanatic. He is the Russian middle class being fed into a system that no longer distinguishes between expendable and essential. Behind the front lines, the economic consequences are accelerating. The Kremlin is facing a stark choice. Fund the war or sustain the workforce that keeps the country functioning. Budget data indicate that this choice has already been made. Taxes are rising. Social spending is being cut. The ruble continues to erode against the dollar, steadily destroying purchasing power. This is not a cyclical downturn. Analysts describe it as a structural recession, deeper and more complex than the collapse of the Soviet Union because it is occurring under sanctions, demographic decline, and active war expenditure simultaneously. This is not merely an economic crisis. It is a failure of state function. Infrastructure modernization has stalled. Public services are deteriorating and the same logistical weaknesses crippling the army are manifesting at home. Central heating systems across Russia, many of them inherited from the Soviet era, are failing under metal fatigue. Last winter, a burst pipe in Podolsk left 150,000 residents without heat. That incident now looks less like an anomaly and more like a preview. Transportation networks are also degrading. Russian railways, the backbone of both civilian mobility and military logistics, is facing a looming crisis due to the lack of high-quality ball bearings for rail cars. Sanctions have cut off supplies. Chinese replacements fail under winter stress and heavy loads. This degrades freight capacity, slows troop movement, and further constrains supply chains. Against this backdrop, an unexpected dynamic has emerged. Ukraine's military intelligence program known as I Want to Live has become a lifeline for Russian soldiers who were never meant to fight. The initiative offers a structured surrender process emphasizing compliance with the Geneva Conventions. Those who cross the lines receive medical treatment, food, and shelter, the very basics their own state has failed to provide. The desperation extends beyond land. To compensate for declining oil revenues, Russia has expanded the use of aging, poorly regulated tankers operating under shadow fleets. In winter conditions, these vessels pose not only economic risks, but environmental ones. An accident in the Baltic or the Straits during storm season could trigger a catastrophic spill, followed by a diplomatic blockade that would further strangle exports. At this point, the situation resembles a risk assessment more than a traditional war analysis. Russia is simultaneously running a freezing army, a starving population. Russia's dealing with some serious issues, think crumbling infrastructure and a budget that's bleeding cash. No regime can keep that up for long, right? Official numbers from Russia's own Ministry of Finance show just how bad it is. In 2024, the budget deficit hit $34.5 billion, and by October 2025, it shot up to $50 billion. They're draining the National Welfare Fund to fill the gaps. But it wasn't meant for this kind of spending. The war's costing around $1 billion a day. Those numbers don't lie. They don't really react to speeches, they just pile up. The human toll is staggering. Investigations by Media Zona and the BBC have confirmed over 150,000 Russian military deaths, and that doesn't even count the missing or unidentified. Analysts think the real number could be 2 to 3 times higher, with total casualties nearing 700,000. Winter is really bringing this harsh reality to light. Russia aimed to use energy as a weapon, but now energy shortages are shaking things up. Cities aim to use their size as a strength, but now it feels more like a burden. When the snow melts, what will be left isn't a tale of heroism, but abandoned wheelchairs, frozen gear, and scars that will last for generations. History doesn't often show mercy. Leaders are remembered not just for their wins, but for the cost of those victories. As winter drags on, it looks like Putin's promise of victory is stuck right there on Ukrainian soil. A sky that's no longer Moscow's. It's just heat.